Leading us in Sanga today is Malati Devi Dasi. Malati Devi Dasi joined and was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco in 1967, and she became an integral part of the pioneer years of ISKCON. In 1968, along with her 6-week-old daughter Saraswati, Malati Devi Dasi was part of a team of 6 adults to be the first ones to establish Krishna consciousness in the UK. That epic adventure resulted in the release of the Radha Krishna Temple album in 1969, produced by Beatle George Harrison. The Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and other devotional songs are featured on that recording, which received worldwide attention. Malati Devi Dasi then moved back to India to assist in establishing ISKCON there, bringing it back to its source. During her time there, she assisted with the purchase and shipping of several sets of temple murtis to establish deity worship services in the American temples of Detroit, Dallas, Toronto, and Chicago. This experience introduced her to the process of purchasing murtis, a service she carried out for various temples. Even her discovery of Jagannath figurines at a market in San Francisco led to the worship of Lord Jagannath in ISKCON. So it seems there's a special connection between Malati Devi Dasi and deity worship. In 1990, she established an all-female ISKCON temple, which later was awarded a large road-sized bronze plaque by the State of Ohio Historical Society, recognizing the center as the first Vaishnav Hindu temple in the state, mentioning in detail its unique status in training women in Krishna consciousness. In 1998, she became the first woman appointed to the GBC. Malati Devi Dasi is a founding member of the Vaishnavi ministry, which at the time was called the Women's Ministry. And she spends most of her time traveling, offering classes and instructions in Krishna conscious practice and philosophy. And she is also a regular participant in interreligious gatherings. She holds deep concern for the future of ISKCON in general and for the youth in particular. She advocates engaging women in all manners of service inspired by Srila Prabhupada, who always engaged her in service. Malati Devi Dasi is also the impetus for the beautiful book, Bond of Love, which we, Vaishnavi Ministry North America, is currently promoting through interviews, which Malati Devi Dasi was interviewed last Saturday for us for the book. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to read this book. It is full of so many inspiring experiences by Srila Prabhupada's spiritual daughters. So with all of that, Mother Malati Devi Dasi, please take it away.
Hare Krishna. Well, now you said everything. Haribol. I wasn't exactly sure where to go today, how to get there, where to go. And this is the beginning of my 5th hour on Zoom today, starting quite early in the morning. But the topic being Srila Prabhupada makes it a little easier. You know. Our Lord and Master's divine grace. So just prior to starting, I would just like to say that I can offer some personal experiences and experiences I shared with others during Prabhupada's Manifest Presence. And when I do that, I'm really not trying to entertain anybody. My goal is to assist devotees, whether they're men or women or even children, to come closer to Srila Prabhupada, knowing him as a genuine spiritual master, a genuine, wonderful, saintly, holy person, and genuine person in our heart who is capable and does guide us daily, if we allow that. Okay. So now comes this part. You mentioned my daughter, Saraswati Devi. Quite often, Srila Prabhupada would call her Miss Saraswati. And Vishaka Devi Dasi, who is the fearless leader and temple president now of Bhaktivedanta Manor, and was the first officially unofficial, she was official, but it was unofficial that she was official photographer, both her and her husband Yadabar, in ISKCON. And I would say a good 80% or more of the pictures we see from the early era came from her camera, which she carried around, bead bag in one hand, camera in the other. It was her passport, her entry to Srila Prabhupada when others couldn't even get close to the door. She could be with him at any time because her service was recognized and accepted by him. So I don't know if any of you get back to Godhead Magazine. So if you do, you might know that the current issue features an article by Satyaraj Prabhu about my daughter, Saraswati. And okay, now let's see, share screen. So this is a short clip featuring my daughter, Saraswati, 98% of it as she was, and one quick photo as she is now. Okay. Okay, now where do I go from here?
You click share screen. There are options for which screen you can share, Mother Malati.
Okay. So I see that. Oops. Wait a minute. Okay. All right. I think I will. Needless to say, I'm totally technologically challenged at every step.
Well, we can see your home screen. So as soon as you can put the video on the home screen, we'll be able to see it.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes,
okay.
We can see it.
Malati and Shamsundar Prabhus are two pioneers who helped Srila Prabhupada spread the Hare Krishna movement in the USA, the UK, India, and elsewhere. Their daughter, Saraswati, had a unique relationship with Srila Prabhupada. About her, Srila Prabhupada said, "Saraswati is a wonderful girl. Her Krishna conscious activities are giving us much pleasure. She is so nice that as soon as there is chanting sound of kirtan, immediately she begins to dance and clap. Even the audience becomes astonished and they follow her activities. This child, Saraswati, must have been executing devotional service in her past life. She is preaching. She asks one gentleman, 'Do you know Krishna?' The person says, 'No, I don't know.' 'Oh,' she says, 'he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead.' Turning to his students, Srila Prabhupada said, 'All of you can say like that. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and chant his holy name, Hare Krishna. If you simply do this, then you are a preacher. You are a spiritual master. It is so nice.' In this way, Srila Prabhupada loved and encouraged the children, their parents, and indeed all his followers in the Hare Krishna movement. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Okay. So I could actually even tell some of the stories behind some of those photos. Om Gyantam Brandasya Janana Sakalaya Chakchumalitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paskacha Desatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Panchakalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhu vaivyacha patitanam bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So I'm going to ask for some direction from the participants. Which direction should I go? What should I share with you?
I would love to hear, Mother Malati, about what just your mothering at that time. I mean, we all.
That's going to be a really short conversation.
What was that like?
Well, my daughter was the first child born in the movement, conceived and born in the movement. Actually, Himavati Devi Dasi would have had the first child, but she carried that child full term and it was born dead. So she was just devastated. They had looked forward and planned, and so many hopes were there for this child. And she had made an entire room dedicated to this expected, it turned out it was a boy, I believe. And it was very difficult. And in those days, we weren't too aware of Vaishnav compassion. We knew we weren't the body, so that baby wasn't its body, and you're not that body, and a little softer compassion. I mean, all that is true, of course, but the compassionate nature of Vaishnav just doesn't throw the philosophy like cold water in your face, especially at difficult times such as losing your first child upon birth. So it was quite rough. And I took a lesson from that. I was already pregnant, but I thought, I'm not going to buy anything for this baby until it's born and breathing. So my kid was born, breathing, and had nothing at all by way of what babies are supposed to have. And Shyam Sundar was building the second Rath Yatra cart. This was in 68, first Rath Yatra, July of 67. So he was busy building this cart along with his helper, Dayananda, and literally anybody who would maybe come by and just for a minute, 2 or a few hours, give a hand. And so what he did, we had a van, but a really funky van without only one seat. There was only one seat, the driver's seat. That was it. And he brought that van and he parked it in the parking lot and brought me the keys and said, I'll see you later. So, because, we didn't know what time exactly I would be discharged. So there was in the van at my request, a wicker basket, a wicker laundry basket. And when I came out of the hospital with the baby, I put that baby in the wicker laundry basket, which wasn't secured to anything. And neither were seat belts in vogue at that time. So I wasn't belted up because we didn't have any seat belts because it was a pretty old van. And my first stop was at a store called Sears and Roebuck. It had like everything. It was one of the first prototypes of a department store. And I went with the baby down to the basement where the baby goods were. And immediately somebody comes up with a big smile. Can I help you? And I said, yes, I don't know what to buy. And she kind of looks at me. I said, well, I just have the baby and we don't have anything. And she looked, there was 2 of them. So they kind of exchanged, these kind of knowing glances. And then I realized maybe they thought something weird was happening. So I explained what happened and why I didn't have anything. And then they became completely motherly and helpful, and they started piling things. And then I said, well, wait a minute, I don't need too much because we're going to be leaving in a couple of weeks or a month at the most. We're going to be leaving for England. And we don't know where we're going to live. So I just need the minimum amount. And again, the looks were there. Anyway, we got back to the apartment. And in those days, we had the idea that devotees should not sleep on beds. It's just sleep on the ground or sleep on the floor. Not even a yoga mat, because yoga hadn't hit the airwaves then, so we didn't even have yoga mats, but just nothing on the floor. And our neighbors across the street happened to be the Grateful Dead. And so they came in to take, quote unquote, darshan of the baby. And they noticed nothing, like just bare floor. We had no chairs, no tables, nothing. And they looked at each other. And then one of them went out, ran across the street, and came back with this lovely little hand-carved baby's bed, like on, it was small, tall on the floor, like with. So she ended up with a bed. Prabhupada had named her, Shamsundar had called him right after the birth. And he said her name would be Miss Saraswati Devi. But that's her official name, Saraswati Devi. And here's an example of the difference, in my opinion, between men and women. So I'm on that bed, like just coming out of the throes of childbirth. And I was just relieved the child was breathing. And he goes, "We're going to have more." And at that point, I said, "You can have more. This is it for me." Anyway. I don't know. What else? What was the question exactly?
Thank you. Thank you, Malati. That was beautiful. Perfect. There's more questions in the chat box, but that was so sweet and delightful. Thank you. Oh my, that was great.
Okay, behind the phone.
Hare Krishna, Malati, Devi Dasi. There was actually a question that was a good kind of segue from what you just said, asking about your years as your time in London, establishing the movement there.
Well, before going to London, we made a brief stop. In Montreal, which was where Prabhupada was waiting to hear about whether or not he'd get a permanent visa for America. So he was like exiling in Montreal. And we arranged that we would stop there before going on to England. And when we arrived, we knew Prabhupada wouldn't be living in the temple, because the temple at that time was in an old bowling alley. And there was no separate rooms for the devotees. I mean, there were rooms, but here's what the rooms were like. There were clotheslines crisscrossing at certain dimensions. And then sheets were safety pinned on the clotheslines. So your room was a little makeshift space, and your walls were sheets. So privacy was at a minimum. And somehow or other, I was fortunate that Saraswati was a fairly quiet child, because in that situation, if she had been, kids do and can cry. And somehow or other, every baby has a built-in amplifier that just can blow your eardrums, like this little tiny thing, and whoa, and it comes out this sound out of their little mouths, and you try to stop them and they only get louder. I was blessed that Saraswati was not one of those children. because in that situation, it would have been highly uncomfortable. And I think we would have been, shall we say, unwelcomed after about 1 minute. Unfortunate. So we got there to Montreal, and we knew Prabhupada had a place to stay nearby. And I said to Janaki, let's go find him. She goes, well, how will we know? Because, they weren't handing the address out. I said, we'll know. When we find a house with orange cloth hanging out, we'll know. And sure enough, we found a house with the orange cloth hanging out. And we went up to the door and we knocked on the door. And Govinda Dasi, who was serving along with her husband at the time, Gaura Sundar, opened the door, and then she turned and she said, Swamiji, at that point, the Prabhupada hadn't kicked in. So Swamiji, the devotees from San Francisco are here. Malati, her baby, and Janaki are here. And Prabhupada immediately looks up, we'd walked in, and standing in the little doorway that went to the room where he was, would have his desk. It wasn't his bedroom, but it was where he would work. And it was like a couple steps down. So we're standing at the top of the 2 steps, and he looks and he goes, just this morning, this very morning, I had a dream about this child, this very child. I had a dream about her. And I was so astounded. I didn't even think to ask, oh, what did you dream? What was that dream? I didn't ask. And he didn't mention further. Just that instant spontaneous recognition was incredibly important and valuable, that he knew her. And so that was the beginning of the many stories and tales with Saraswati and Srila Prabhupada. While we were there, there's a famous picture which shows myself, baby on my lap, and Mukunda, and Jamuna, Janaki is there, and Rukmini is also there. We're all getting Gayatri, but Rukmini was getting initiated, her first initiation. She had come with us from San Francisco. And so that was a historical event for all of us. And then, in fact, when we first arrived, Himavati said, you're going to get second initiation. We hadn't heard about that. I said, what does that mean? And she goes, more mantras to chant. And when she said that, I kind of like, oh my God, this baby, we're leaving the country. I could barely get 16 rounds done, more mantras. And anyway, it happened. We got those mantras. And Prabhupada would meet with us and give details on the performance of Harinam and of Kirtan. I didn't go to too many of those meetings because I was busy with a newborn, and it was life. But on the day we were going to leave, I started thinking about, my God, we don't know if we're ever going to get back. We don't know if we'll ever see Swamiji again. And we're supposed to go to England, and we're supposed to meet the Beatles. This was our plan by Shyam Sundar. He had this idea, what the great Bhagavad Gita, what the great men do, well, the common man will follow. And the greatest men to the most common people at that time were the Beatles. John Lennon had caused a big ruckus by saying, whoa, we're more famous than Jesus. Now, people took that really out of context because he was just indicating, he was referring to the fact that they could fill up a huge stadium with 10,000 people, and there were still people out in the street wanting to get in, but there would be no room. And, you don't see that kind of a lineup at the church. So it was just, some kind of a contextual statement. It wasn't intended to be dismissing Christianity or in particular dismissing Jesus. But they were very famous. So, hey, if those people chant Hare Krishna, the whole world will chant Hare Krishna. So that was our game plan. Now we say strategic planning, whatever, that was our plan. And then you might think, my God, what do you think? You know, everybody in the world wants to meet the Beatles, and here you are, you know, 6 scraggly adults and a baby coming from America, and nobody knows you're here. Nobody knows why you're here. You know, who's going to pay any attention to you? So we had these daily plans of doing stupidly outrageous, crazy little things to try to get attention. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is we make apple pies, because Apple, now it's the name of a computer, right? But, or an iPhone, whatever. But at that time, Apple was the name of the Beatles music company. And everybody wants to meet the Beatles. So there would just be this huge amount of people always standing outside their office. So how are we going to crack the code and get inside? So we'd make these apple pies with Hare Krishna written on the top. And what we considered our coup d'etat, we got this little plastic apple with feet on it. And it had a little flag where the stem was. And we added a little paper flag that said the Hare Krishna Mahamantra on that apple. And it had a wind up. So if you wound it up, the little feet on the bottom of the plastic apple would walk, and there's a little apple would be walking. So that was inserted, open the door and put it in the apple's, you know, the Apple office. And here comes this plastic walking apple with a Hare Krishna flag. But none of that earned us an audience or even an invitation to, like, well, hey, what are you guys doing? Nothing. What really did it was when our friends from America came over, and our friends were people from the Grateful Dead, and more interestingly, a motorcycle group called Hell's Angels. Probably nobody has heard of those people nowadays, but they were really rough, tough people back in the time. And in fact, when we had our little temple in San Francisco, they were friends with the folks next door, kind of a radical group called the Diggers, who were anti-establishment and so many antis. And they started chanting what they thought was Hare Krishna. And what they were chanting was Harley Krishna, Harley Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Harley, Harley. So Harley is the name of their great, big, huge motorcycles. They still make these Harley Davidson, big, big, big company, big, big bicycles. So they came to England with the managers of the Grateful Dead, and they brought their motorcycles with them on the plane. They thought, well, they're going to let loose and tear up the streets of London, not realizing that London's streets are so crooked and discombobulated, not like in America where everything's kind of like a grid plan. So they were kind of frustrated in their attempts to enjoy. And they had they had gotten the members of the Grateful Dead had gotten an audience with the Beatles. And as soon as Shamsundar found out, because he was college friends with one of the managers, whose name was Rock Scully, he said, hey man, do you mind, kind of tag along with you? Sure, come on, come on. So when they got there, they were shown to a waiting room. And when they opened the door to go in that room, they saw the room was full of people. Every one of those people just there to meet the Beatles. So again, like what was going to happen, who knows? But at least they were inside this time. And then Shamsundar describes how the door cracks open and one of the Beatles' head comes through and he's looking and looking, and he just suddenly makes a beeline, walks straight over through the room, not looking right or left, to a door on the other end of the room and disappears. Next one came in, same thing. Third one came in, same thing. And the last one who hadn't yet come in was George Harrison. So door opens, George looks in, he starts to dash across the room, and all of a sudden he stops and he looks right at Shamsundar. He goes, hey man, where you guys been? I've been looking for you. There it was. Krishna handed everything over, Lord in the heart. And that sparked a lifelong relationship. And so he invited Sham and to come in that room. And he invited him to come with his friends, that was the rest of us, over to his home at the end of the week. I think it was a Friday or Saturday, to come for dinner at his home. So one thing about Hare Krishnas is that we know without a doubt, Krishna owns everything, not us. So when we go to somebody else's house, we don't even consider this belongs to so-and-so. This is Krishna's house, or at least it should be. So we go to George Harrison's house, one of the most famous people in the world. First thing we started doing was rearranging the furniture, getting it all out of the way so we'd have a nice space for kirtan. And myself and Janaki and Jamuna headed to the kitchen, and George's wife at the time, Patty, was there. They had previously been to India, and she knew a few cookings. So she was making cucumber raita, and we got to work making whatever it was we were going to prepare for the dinner. And that went really well. And after the dinner, George says, let's have another kirtan. But he suggested we go outside to his backyard, and had a fairly spacious backyard with a little bit of a slope, so there was a nice view of the night stars and lights of the city. And actually it was not right in the city, but a little outside. So after that kirtan, we're going back inside, and he goes, well, we should make an album. We should make a record, he says. So for younger people, record meant a disc with a hole in it that you put on a machine that had an arm with a needle on the end, and the little disc would start going around and around, and the thing with the needle would go on the disc, and that would cause the sound that was embedded in this plastic round disc to filter through the what they called gramophone or record player. So that was beyond our wildest dreams, although it was our wildest dreams, that we would do something, we'd be able to do something where the whole world would benefit. And we could introduce Srila Prabhupada and the Hare Krishna Mahamantra to the whole world. We hadn't come to take, we hadn't come to ask. And that was one of the things that set us aside from the GP, general public. Because most people, they would come, they wanted something, they were asking mostly for money, of course, and we just came to give. We'd give prasadam, we'd give advice if we were asked, we'd put them in contact with Srila Prabhupada. We were not in the least in awe and reverence of their exalted status of being so famous. We were there on behalf of Prabhupada, and we had Prabhupada, and Prabhupada to us was more famous than the Beatles. And we were feeling very happy and very honored that we could introduce these people to Srila Prabhupada and the Mahamantra. So we had no reason to feel intimidated or impressed by them. What impressed us by them, especially George, was his willingness to participate and listen. And he showed genuine interest. The others not so much so. But George said, let's make a record. And next thing you know, we're in the studio making a record. And the songs that were chosen was the Govindam prayers and the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And I remember one devotee, Hari Vilas, he had shown up at the temple from Paris, I think a day before. So, he doesn't know what's going on because we didn't have internet. We didn't have loudspeakers telling the world of ISKCON, hey, we just met the Beatles and they're going to make a record. Nobody knew it, So he shows up and found out that he could play this mandolin. So Jamuna says, would you like to come with us? We're going to the Beatles studio. We're going to make a record. And he couldn't even believe his ears. Like, we're going to the Beatles studio and make a record, and you're inviting me. And but that was the mood, to give what we had gotten from Srila Prabhupada. So at the studio, I remember Jamuna was putting tilak on everybody, And of course, what is a devotee without prasadam? We brought lots of prasadam. And the whole entire day was chanting over and over, over and over, and over and over the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, just waiting to get the perfect take, as they call it. And it was hours and hours with only a break for prasadam. And at one point, inexplicably, I picked up this big hammer, like I don't know what you call the things you hit a gong with, but anyway, it looks like a hammer. And there was this big, really large gong. And without even asking, without even thinking about it, I just whacked that gong with the hammer right at the end of the mantra. And suddenly everybody's head just turned and looked at me like, you just spoiled everything. And I was shrinking into my body, you know, like doing the turtle thing, getting as small as I could. And the next day we came back and George comes in, he has this big grin on his face. I think we got it. I think we got it. He'd spent the night mixing the tracks. So he plays the Mahamantra. And at the end of the mantra, that gong was there. So Super Soul won, because that's the only explanation I have for why I picked up that gong. And I was vindicated by Krishna's mercy. So that recording propelled us forward. And we were heard literally around the world, particularly all over Europe and in America. And because it was sponsored by Apple Records, of course, anything with the Beatles touch, it becomes gold. And in particular, George was personally so interested in how things would go. And we would be sent to different countries to perform our hit record because it got on the charts. And people were just thinking, it was called the Radha Krishna Temple. And people just thought that was like the name of a rock group, and we were the group, and that was our name. They didn't realize until they saw us that actually the name of the LP, somebody's asked me, was the Radha Krishna Temple. So people were not expecting actually to see what they saw, which was these people in saris and dhotis and shaved heads and the sikas and me with a baby on my hip. And they soon figured out we were not your average rock group. So going all around, and at one point, Srila Prabhupada came with us to Amsterdam because that particular time, not only were we going to perform in a regular performance hall, but there was a TV show. And Srila Prabhupada agreed to come. And the people were not used to, you know, the people, the TV people, they were kind of used to their form of entertainment. And we were seen as entertainers. But when we arrived, they kind of like took it in. I remember Prabhupada, he was like taking it in also. And they had these girls. They were called go-go girls. That was like back in the day. Go-go girls would dance in extremely short clothing. And so they were going to be on dancing when we would be chanting. And the way they would dance was not like the way we would dance, like gently swaying side to side with raised arms. It was more, to be honest, sexual in nature, you know, making suggestive movements. So Guru Das went up and he told them, and not only that, the lack of clothing. So Guru Das went up and told them that actually it wasn't really appropriate, but we could show them a dance they could do. And if you could get some pieces of cloth, we can, you know, adjust their costumes. So using whatever came, somehow or other, more or less saris were on them. And they were doing the side step. Wasn't probably what they would have ever imagined. They probably didn't even think it was fun, but it did, you know, it looked much more dignified. And then right at the end, they brought in this, what do you call, frozen, you know, the kind of ice that creates like misty appearance. And they brought that in. So suddenly it looked like, you know, Prabhupada and all of us were like coming out of the clouds as we were singing, and the go-go girls, who are now sort of looking like devotees, were dancing. And it was quite an interesting situation. And it really spoke highly just what Srila Prabhupada, who he was, how he was, and how important it was for him to spread the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He could have just said, we're out of here. You know, he didn't. He took every situation and turned it into an opportunity to spread Krishna consciousness. Back in San Francisco, we had managed to attract the attention of a local radio host. And this host had a huge following, but he had a following of people because he insulted everybody, including his guest. And people loved it. I mean, more like, you know, it's kind of that way today. You know, the more you insult somebody, the more votes you get. Anyways, somehow he had heard about Swamiji. He sent an invitation, and the devotees weren't sure. Should we go there? If we go there with Swamiji, he's going to be insulted publicly. So they brought it to Prabhupada's attention, and Prabhupada said, that's all right. At least they'll hear Hare Krishna. They'll hear the mantra. This was always the prime concern. Sometimes there would be some newspaper articles that were not entirely flattering, and Prabhupada would count the times Hare Krishna was mentioned. And when he saw that it was mentioned quite a bit, he was satisfied. Never mind, they are chanting the mantra. So the concern, the goal was to get people to hear the holy names and get them even better to chant. So he agreed to go on this guy's show. And the show's format was the person in charge would introduce the guest would speak, and then there would be, from the radio audience, callers. They'd call in live and ask questions. So Prabhupada gave it, and you had a short amount of time to say what you had to say. And Prabhupada was just the epitome of giving the entire philosophy in a nutshell. If the amount of time was 2.5 minutes, in 2.5 minutes, you got the essence of Krishna consciousness. And that's what happened in this situation. So then the host says, okay, now let's hear from the listening audience. Well, all the devotees were sitting there by their phones. But right away, we're ringing up, and the guy goes, yeah, this is so-and-so. And then it was Gargan Muni. And he goes, Swamiji, what is the meaning of Hare Krishna? Prabhupada answered. And then the next one was another devotee, maybe Uddhava. And he asked a similar question. And then the guy was catching on, that was all his followers. So he goes, well, I think this is all your followers. So let's see if we can hear from somebody else. So this lady's on the phone. Swamiji? Probably, yes. So you came over on a boat? Yes. And you didn't pay. It was free. You didn't pay. Yes. So you're a freeloader. Prabhupada said yes. I mean, he didn't know that was a really derogatory thing, Yeah, it was free. Yes. The most amazing thing, because then we're all thinking, uh-oh, now this guy is going to just launch his tirade and, this is going to be so painful. What did he do? He goes, well, that's enough of her. And he knocks her off the air. Somehow or other, this man who made a living by insulting his guest became so charmed by Srila Prabhupada's utter honesty and transparency that even he felt protective. So it was a wonderful moment. Yeah. So cutting back to England, we had the record, we're going all over the world. And at the same time, we didn't yet have our own permanent place to stay. We had a place, but it wasn't livable at the time. It required a lot of rehabilitation, reconstruction, and where to go, what to do. And John Lennon very kindly offered that we could stay at his estate, which he had just purchased along with his wife, Yoko Ono. So we all suddenly headed out to this place, started living there, and every day somehow or other, devotees would go into town, and Shamsundar and others would be working on the temple construction, and the rest of the devotees would do Harinam on the street, on Oxford Street. And from those Harinam at Oxford Street, so many devotees, early day devotees who are still with the movement today, manifested. And there was one couple, they had a small kid about this age of my daughter, Saraswati, and they had what was called a barrow, B-A-R-R-O. It was like a kiosk on Oxford Street. And they sold whatever they were selling there. And every day they're seeing these strange people, but happy looking people, going up and down the street with these instruments and chanting the same, happy, asking questions, and they had more questions. And then one day they said, "We'd like to join you." Okay. Well, at the time we're living at Lenin's, which they didn't know that, but the next thing you know, they're living at Lenin's too. So things were just kind of very swift, very magical. There's one of the pictures that you were showed Srila Prabhupada in a heavy type of woolen coat with his hand out holding the hand of my daughter. And that one was taken at Lenin's house. And what had happened there was Srila Prabhupada was going on his morning walk, and I couldn't go on the morning walks because I was the devotee's cook for breakfast and lunch. And so I was cooking. And the places that we were staying were like former horse stalls. It had been like a barn for, thoroughbred horses. So the doors, like doors on a horse's stall, have a top opening and a bottom opening. So we used to call those double Dutch doors. So I had the top door open so I could see when Prabhupada went by. And Swati was, still little. So she was like jumping up and down because she knew he would be coming by, but she couldn't see over the edge. And at one point when she jumped up and down, she somehow jiggled the handle and the door opened, and she ran right out and grabbed Srila Prabhupada's hand. And so Prabhupada stopped, and he's looking at her with a smile, and she's not letting go of his hand. And he goes, "Saraswati, you're not properly dressed," because you could see he had a big wool coat on. She's just in her house slippers and a little overall. So she looks up, and at that point I've come out, and she turns and looks at me, and without saying a word, she made it very clear, "Get my clothes, my coat, my boots," which I did. And when she put her coat on, she wouldn't let go of Prabhupada. So first she did one arm, and then she grabbed Prabhupada's hand, and then she let go with the other arm to get that coat on. So she went on the walk with Srila Prabhupada. And there was many instances in that, along that kind of a situation where somehow or other she managed to be with Srila Prabhupada. And that was her great fortune. Just like I said, that Vishaka's camera was her passport to go with Prabhupada whenever, wherever. Well, Saraswati's passport was just herself. She was the only one who could enter and exit at will with Srila Prabhupada. One day, still at Lenin's, Prabhupada was teaching Jamuna deity worship. He personally taught her deity worship. And then Arti came, and Saraswati walks in the room, and she's by Prabhupada's desk. And then Jamuna had just offered a flower, so he hands the flower to Srila Prabhupada, And for some reason, Saraswati decided to leave, and she starts marching out the door, and Prabhupada took the flower and he threw it, and it popped on the back of her head and then dropped to the ground. So she picked up the flower, put it in her hand, and marched back to Srila Prabhupada and attempted to put it in his mouth. So that was a very sweet, even amusing exchange. But what's interesting about that was his servant at the time became really shocked and even offended that Swamiji was playing with a girl child. And in a letter to another devotee, after and then that person, there was other apparas that went along with, but that one was mentioned by Prabhupada in a letter, because eventually that person left. You cannot speak degradingly of the spiritual master and expect to stay around for long. So eventually he left. And in a letter to Gargamuni, he mentioned about this person leaving. And he mentioned about that particular incident where he had criticized Srila Prabhupada for, quote unquote, playing with a girl child. During that time, during that same period where the temple was being constructed, and we were at Lennon's house, there was a series of programs inside London. So it meant we had to travel from Ascot, which was where Lennon lived, into town, about a 45-minute drive in the evening without traffic. And the name of the place that the programs occurred was called Conway Hall. And this was our first attempt to have some kind of a very, what we thought would be, and it was, prestigious program. It wasn't just hippies. People from all walks of life came. If you see some of the pictures, you'll see the suit and coat, the suit, top and tie kind of people, student type of people, some long hair type of people. And this was very pleasing to Prabhupada to be able to get the message out to a broad audience. So after each lecture, the devotees would stay behind and pass prasadam out and talk to the guests. And Prabhupada would go back to Ascot. And myself and Saraswati, along with Prabhupada's servant, the same one I mentioned, would go also. So the system was if Kirtan would end, we would go out and we would get in the car first because we didn't want him to wait while we got in the car. Now, the car I spoke about, I should have mentioned, was that we had arranged a rental car because we didn't have anything that was suitable. We just had a really funky vehicle that Shamsundar had kind of picked up for like not even 100 pounds. I think it was like 65 pounds or something. And it was a little tiny, it looked like a matchbook toy truck, red front, the cabin part and the engine were red with a little black decor, and the back part was flat, open, flatbed. So Shamsundar put a canopy over it so that the other devotees could ride in, if it was raining, they wouldn't get wet, etc., and it would be warmer. So this car came with a driver. It was the system at that place. And every week we got the same driver. His name was Eddie. And he was a very good, cautious driver. He was unfailingly polite, and he never once indicated any interest whatsoever in what we were doing. He was just the driver. So while the show would be going on, he would sit at the back by the door, and we would come out, and then he would go out and wait by the door for Prabhupada to come, and he'd open the door for Prabhupada to get in and then shut the door, and then we would go. So this one particular night, which is there's a picture of this night, a couple of them actually, Prabhupada gave what you could call a very classic, you are not this body, you're spirit soul, and the duty of the spirit soul is to serve Krishna in love. Very, essence of Krishna conscious lecture. And then after that, usually he would leave. sometimes stayed for the second kirtan. So he asked Jamuna to chant that night, and which he often did. And at one point, he got up and he started dancing. And I was down on the floor right in front of the stage, and I'm looking and I realized his feet aren't touching the stage. He's like literally dancing on air. And then, even more amazingly, everybody saw this and everybody was up, the whole entire audience. And there is a picture of this. Everybody's up. And as quickly as it began, it also ended. And so I remember going out in the car that night, and in the back there with Purushottam, the servant. Eddie comes, he opens the door, Prabhupada gets in, he shuts the door. He goes around, he gets in the car. You can hear him start to put the key in the ignition. Suddenly he stops and he turns. Well, Prabhupadre, kind of got the name mixed up. Prabhupadre, you got a little out of control tonight, didn't you? And he nudged him with his elbow. So when that happened, I was floored. And Purushottam just said, oh my God, rebirth material, thinking it was very offensive. So then the key goes all the way in. He starts to turn it and he stops and he goes, but it's just like you say. This car is no good without a driver. And we suddenly understood that he had been listening very carefully to Srila Prabhupada. And he got the message that you're not this body, your spirit soul, and without the spirit soul, there's no meaning to this body. So that was a wonderful moment in seeing how Srila Prabhupada could effectively capture the hearts and minds attention of persons from all walks of life in such a wonderful way. I don't know, what should I go into?
Thank you, Malati Prabhu, for sharing those wonderful nectarian pastimes. The chat board has been just overwhelmingly explaining that. It's just so sweet, just amazing nectarian pastimes. And thank you so much for sharing. Are you okay to take some more questions?
Yeah, I'm just looking here.
I can read them to you. I think there was one. Okay,
sure. For me to just it's good you put up the Radha Krishna Temple album from YouTube. So, but I think everybody should know that. Actually, I was just coming across the letter the other day that Prabhupada was answering a letter to a devotee who had written to say that, all the previous acharyas, Lord Chaitanya wouldn't even look at a woman, wouldn't hear a woman. And every day we hear a woman chanting the Govindam prayers, right? So we think it would be better if we heard you chanting the Govindam prayers. That way, everybody would be happy. Prabhupada's reply was just wonderful. So you think you have discovered something new? We are listening to these prayers every day. I am listening to these prayers. Here in Krishna Balaram Temple in Vrindavan, they are playing these prayers. I have authorized this. And you think you have discovered something new? He said, this isn't a woman singing. First of all, it's a chorus because, there were other devotees there. And he just blistered the guy and goes, if you're disturbed, you can go to the forest and chant. In New York, all over the world, there are so many people, women walking on the streets. Are you going to close your eyes and walk into a building? So he definitely had a broader vision of spreading Krishna consciousness than any one of us had. And he was not afraid to stand behind his own words, by his own example. In one letter, he mentioned, it might have been a conversation, that one of the reasons he was successful was because he engaged his lady disciples. by engaging the ladies, he was able to achieve the success he had. And if you've seen the little film that Vishaka and I have showed and spoken about on occasion, there's one letter, it was to Guru Das, and he says, I have always accepted the service of women, of the ladies, and that is a fact. Somebody's asking about the recent Back to Godhead article. Yeah, we can look it up. I mean, just, I guess the Back to Godhead's maybe online nowadays. I don't really know, but I got an e-copy of the article of the Back to Godhead. So if you're interested to see that, I would suggest maybe BBT has a website, and you can, you know, ask that website, and they can maybe come up with a an e-copy. Oh, now it says not usually available digitally, but I think you can get a zip. Okay, well, I have it digitally, but you can get a single copy at krishnastore.com. So that's from Tiffany, krishnastore.com. And Sharanjali is saying btg.krishna.com/subscriber services. So you can definitely get a single copy without, I don't have a subscription anymore. Tiffany is showing up in the chat about Srila Prabhupada's shower of mercy. So that's like it's an 11-minute slides. There's slides, but in the format of a video. And it's got some soundtrack of the mantra on it. But it was really used for when we would give a discussion on Srila Prabhupada relating to his wonderful, sweet interactions with his female disciples, his shower of mercy. And so you can watch it and it's wonderful, but it's even more wonderful when you hear the dialogue. And I know ISV, ISKCON Silicon Valley, they have somewhere, maybe it's on YouTube, if you put in, you can find it, where Vishaka and myself are speaking, showing the shower of mercy, and then we come to certain pictures and we pause it and then we speak back and forth. So it's not only is it a very sweet exchange to see Srila Prabhupada interacting with his female disciples, because generally we're just hearing about things from the point of view of the men. But I think you're all familiar now. We've already mentioned that A Bond of Love here is out. And this is 305 interviews with Srila Prabhupada's lady disciples. And then Pranada Devi has put out the emergence of the voices of ladies in ISKCON. So there is definitely a shift. And what I am finding is also that senior God sisters, I mean, we're all senior now. I mean, that's it. We're not getting older, we are old, official. So these older Vaishnavis are coming out and taking on responsibilities in ISKCON, preaching and temple management. So many wonderful things that they're able to do, that their children are grown, they have no constraints, they're not working anymore. So we started out full time, and then people got married and they had to kind of shift to maybe part time because you have to support your family, take care of your kids. But now all of that is done, and they're just diving back into the nectar of full-time devotional service in wonderful ways. So the emergence of the voices of the ladies in ISKCON is becoming, it's not a political thing. That's not at all. It's giving back what Prabhupada gave to us and giving and sharing it. And actually, it's a duty of everybody who becomes a member of ISKCON to reciprocate in this matter, to take some responsibility to share the nectar of Lord Chaitanya's mercy. Asking, my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada. What was that like? Well, no, somebody else said I keep a journal. no, not my thing. First of all, when I write, even if I just sign my name, my hand just like gets all cramped up. Even I can't read my own writing after about 3 or 4 words. But it's not my thing. You know, everybody has something they can do and will do, if it's not now, eventually. And not everybody's a writer. But those who are really writing wonderful, wonderful tributes. And I encourage anyone with the inclination to write to pick up your pen or your computer, your iPad, whatever, and write. Prabhupada wanted his disciples to write. One time when we were in Mayapur, it was along the first time we were there, and he took us down to the Yogapika, which is the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he was looking, you know, at everything, and you know, it was like a little rundown, actually. And he said he wanted to see the books. So they go there, and there were a few of his Guru Maharaj's books. That was it. And he goes, they're not preaching. In other words, he wanted us, and he expressed that he wanted us to write. But he wanted us to write in an authentic manner, not just, you know, spin our minds around, but read his books, study his books. And from the realizations that you will gain from doing that, then also write. So I know Giriraj Swami was specifically given that service by Srila Prabhupada, that he should write. And now in his later years, he is just on fire with his writing. So, okay, first time I met Srila Prabhupada. Well, the first time was not in person. It was in September of '66, and we were living on the top, we meaning myself and my boyfriend, who became my husband. You want to know how I met him? That was Shamsunder. I was living in California in Mendocino County, so it's a rural area, at least it used to be, I don't know now. And a lot of hippies were going there from San Francisco to get out of the city. And then for one reason or other, many of the hippies decided to go to Mexico. And pretty soon I was kind of like by myself in a ghost town. A ghost town means where there's no one living. And when I had roommates, that wasn't so bad, but now I'm there by myself and I'm thinking, not such a safe situation. I won't get into details, but one of my roommates who had left had an unwanted encounter. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Mexico too, but I had no idea what that meant. It was just a name on the globe, on the map somewhere. So I walked out of my house to the highway, which was the Coastal Highway 1 that goes along the length of California. I just put my thumb out, like to start hitchhiking. I had a little bag with me, and so many, not so many, like it's a very kind of desolated place. So not so many vehicles went by, and the ones that went by were logging trucks, because that was the former industry there, was cutting trees, and you know, so logging trucks would go by, but nothing that was going to pick me up. And all of a sudden, this white van pulled up, and the guy goes, "Hop in." And I would have hopped in, except that van was going north and I was going to Mexico. At least that's what I thought I was doing. And that was south. So I was just kind of standing there, and he goes, "Well, where are you going?" And I said, "Mexico." He goes, "Well, how long have you been standing there?" Well, in those days, we didn't have any consideration of time. I didn't have a watch. And obviously, we didn't have cell phones. And I just, "Well, I don't know." And he says, "Well, hop in. At least you'll get somewhere." And when he said that, I thought, yeah, good idea. So I hopped in, and instead of going south, I was now going north. So after a few miles, I said, "But, you know, like, oh, where are you going?" I didn't even know where I was going. And he told me he was going to Portland. So when we arrived in Portland, this is where I met for the first time Michael Grant and Jan and Joan, who were two sisters. And Michael and Jan became boyfriend and girlfriend and went to New York City mainly because Michael was a really good musician. He was like a jazz pianist. And, you know, you could maybe hit it big in New York City, not so much in Portland, Oregon. And we started, you know, a correspondence because Sam, my boyfriend, turned out the guy that I hitched a ride with became my boyfriend. That's kind of how things went down in those days. He had gone to school with Mike and had gone to Reed College, which was, you know, kind of a liberal type of college. And they were writing letters back and forth. And we were at the time participating in an activity that was soon to become obsolete if once we became devotees, but you know, we had no vision into that future yet. So we were friends with a person who had learned how to manufacture LSD, and LSD was really popular in those days. So we had a lot of that, and we'd, you know, dispense of it in different ways. And one way you'd put it on a little tiny piece of paper and just eat that piece of paper. And then before you know it, you were like in some other kind of la la land. So we'd write the letters, and at the bottom of the letter, we'd always like put a little drop of the LSD. So one letter we got back from Michael, he goes, well, we meant a Swami and we're going to get married. And I was shocked. We were both shocked. What? You know, who gets married nowadays? You know, we're from the hippie Sampradaya. You just don't do that. You know, we didn't think that was necessary. And next thing you know, Joan, who was Jan's sister, was going to New York to be part of this wedding. So in between getting, you know, going to get married, and before getting married, but both were kind of coinciding, was actually which we didn't know at the time, it was Janmashtami. So on that Janmashtami in 1966 was the first initiation by Srila Prabhupada in America. So Joan and Jan, they were among the people getting initiated. So then they decided to come back west, back to the West Coast. And the reason was that they had planned to go to India. That had been their plan. And it was mentioned by to Mike, he mentioned it to Prabhupada, Swamiji. And by his answer, Mike could realize that maybe before they left, he should do something, you know, like the Swami had given so much to them and should do something for him. So he mentioned that first they were going to go back to the West Coast. And Prabhupada suggested, well, before you go, perhaps you can open a center on the West Coast. Mukunda, now he's Mukunda, so he agreed to that. But on their way back, they went first to Portland. And before getting to Portland, they stopped to see us on the top of this mountain. And it was really a big mountain. It was almost 6,000 feet in height, and a vast, vast wilderness area for as far as you could see, just unstopping wilderness. And there were 3 of these huge mountains, and they were called the Three Sisters. So what were we doing up there was a job with the Forest Service looking out for fires. And if smoke was noticed, then immediately there was a little wind-up thing, walkie-talkie, and you could notify the people down below who were the forest rangers that, you know, where the fire was. And, you know, you had to be able to be expert in giving without the use of a GPS, like the coordinates, like it's here, it's here. Anyway, Sham was good at that. And we're there. And we got one day, it was a low, like no risk fire day. Maybe the day before it had rained or something. So we got a day off. Normally, no days off. And we went to one of the other mountains. And when we came back, we spent the night, we camped out, we came back, and we see a car. Nobody had come up there except occasionally a forest ranger. mean, to get up there was a really treacherous zigzag dirt road. And if you met another vehicle, I mean, what do you do? Because it was a one-lane road with a drop off at the one side. So we were eager to see who was there. And whoever was there was already inside of our cabin. It was a one-room cabin. It had a bed, a table, a couple of chairs, and a wood stove. There was no bathroom. If you needed to do anything with the bathroom, you went outside, and just a few yards away was a stream with clear running water that you could drink without filtering it. And anything else you had to do, take your bath or, answer the call of nature, that stream was there to serve you. So we go in, and there's our friends. There's Mike, there's Jan, and there's Joan. And we were overjoyed to see them. And we thought, when you get a guest, you offer them a place to sit, you offer them some water, but they've already done that. So the next thing, you offer them something valuable. So we offered them some LSD. And they very politely, no, thank you. And we were like, wow, they got married. They don't want LSD. I wonder what's next. So we found out what was next. Jan had been cooking. She already got the stove going, and she was making these little dough things, rolling them out, putting them on the stove, and they would blow up. And it was really fascinating. And when we sat to eat, he mentioned that now they were vegetarians. Now this is like, 66. And honestly, in vegetarianism by the average American was like considered next door to being a communist. It was not an American thing to do. So, of course, for people like us, that was great. We didn't want to be part of the mainstream anyway. So then we're sitting down. So this was my first prasadam, my first introduction to prasadam. And Mike's, then he also tells us that, by the way, they have new names. So Mike was Mukunda, Jan was Janaki, and Joan was still Joan. So there was still some common footing there. And so Mukunda says, after dinner, I have something I want to show you. And what he showed us was the first volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam that Prabhupada brought over with him on the Jaladuta. In his first volume in 3 parts, first canto in 3 parts. And on the cover, if you have been fortunate enough to see the original that Prabhupada brought, there is Lord Vishnu lying on the Anantasesh. So what I saw was a man with blue skin and 4 arms lying on a snake. And out of the belly of that man was a flower with another man on top of it who also had blue skin, but this guy had 4 heads and 4 arms. And I'm like, what is this? Who is this? And Mukunda, in a very sober way, because Mukunda was a very sober person. He wasn't a drugged out hippie. This is God. And when he said that, I was immediately gravitated, because the hippies were really looking for truth with no clue what the truth could be, or how to find it. And there was a lot of debates going on about God. Maybe you were God, maybe I was God. And when it came to that, we're all God. And I thought, if I'm God, the world is hopeless. So I didn't accept that. But I still had some indication and some notion of at what they call nowadays higher power. There was something, I don't know what it was, who it was, but it was bigger than me. And I was interested in that. And I thought, if there was a God that couldn't be like us, So when he said, this is God, I was like, yes. I immediately accepted. And then the next day, they were going to go continue their journey. And he goes, why don't you come with us? We're going to San Francisco. We're going to start a temple. So I began my inquiry, and I asked a very deep question. My question was, what's a temple? And Mukunda said, it's a storefront painted white, which is basically what we did in those days. One time somebody asked Prabhupada why we went to these storefronts, and he just answered very matter of factly, cheap rent, because most of us, we weren't working, or if we were working, it was not well paying, so cheap rent was important. And so, okay, that was a temple, storefront painted white. Okay, well, maybe we can join you. But right now we're here on this mountaintop and we have a contract with the federal government. And we have to stay until the first snowfall. So this was the end of December, about something like that. So we all go to sleep that night. Next morning, I'm up early, answer the call of nature. I open the door, and to my utter astonishment, there was snow. I mean, it wasn't deep, but it was snow everywhere. And right in front of our doorstep were the footprints of a mountain lion. And I was like so excited. I ran and I started calling the people, the rangers down below, and I said, okay, we're leaving. And, what do you mean you're leaving? Yeah, we're leaving. Why are you leaving? Well, it snowed. It snowed. And he goes, it didn't snow down here. So, well, it snowed up here. And he goes, it won't last. And I'm looking at the contract, and it didn't say it had to last. It just said for snowfall. So we took that really literally, and we decided we were going to leave. It took us a couple days. We'd borrowed a horse, borrowed some chickens. We'd acquired a dog and 2 cats. We, kind of expanded ourselves. So the horse went back, the chickens went back, but the dog and the cats came with us to San Francisco. And that dog's name was Ralph. And Ralphie became a friend to Srila Prabhupada. And he met him at the airport on Prabhupada's first arrival in San Francisco. If you Google San Francisco 67, January, Prabhupada Airport, or you'll see him coming, Prabhupada's coming, and these people surrounding him. And all of a sudden, there's little Ralph bouncing along, waving his tail. So when we arrived in San Francisco, of course, we didn't have an address. Again, we're uncharted territory, had lived there, been living there, we knew people, but suddenly we're in another situation now. And we knew that Swamiji liked the boys and girls to get married if they were living together and weren't married. And we decided, yeah, we would do that. And that if you got initiated, you would not anymore take intoxications, meaning the LSD or marijuana, and no coffee or tea. So that was okay. Neither of us were into coffee, so that was not a problem. And no gambling. Well, we didn't do that either, and no illicit sex. We're going to fix that by getting married. So, things are getting fixed, and we looked for and found an empty storefront, began to paint it white, began to fix it up. And I remember one day this fellow came and he goes, hey, what are you guys doing? Well, we're making a temple. And he goes, oh. He says, I just came back from India and I'm an artist. And he's looking at our walls, which were totally bare. I'll paint you a picture. So a couple of days before Prabhupada arrived, he arrived with this picture, and it was a considerably large picture. And it was a painting of Vishnu, which was like that guy on the cover of the book. 4 arms, blue skinned. But he wasn't on a snake. He took a little artistic liberty, and this Vishnu was like exploding out of a volcano. And we didn't know anything about, parampara and the disciplic succession, any of that. So we just thought, oh, that's great. And we put it on our wall. And then Shamsundar had a Moroccan prayer mat that he'd picked up when he was doing herbology in Morocco. And he put that right behind on the wall. And that was basically the entire decoration of the temple. And then a small platform was made, what we called the dais, because we hadn't heard about Vyasa sign, but we made this little platform for him to speak from, and he made a little book holder. So at the airport, about maybe 50 people were there. We had done some advertising. The first advertisement went out was Swamiji is coming. And it was a picture of that famous picture where he's sitting under a tree in Tompkins Square Park. Then he has his hand like this. And most of us just thought that was like mystical, but the reality was he was shading his eyes from the sun. But we put that picture on a poster. We just said, Swamiji is coming, chant Hare Krishna, and we put the whole mantra. We didn't say when he was coming or where he was coming to because we didn't know yet. And then the next advertisement happened. Now we found a address, the storefront. So we said, Swamiji is coming to 518 Frederick Street, chant Hare Krishna. And because we didn't know yet when he was coming. But then finally, we got everything together and the date was there. And we were inviting people to come and meet and greet him at the airport. He came on American Airlines, which somehow or other is still flying people. Maybe it's because they had the good fortune of being Prabhupada's airline for a couple of times, or more than that, actually. So on his airport arrival, in those days, anybody could go into the airport. There was no holds bar. So we're there. Our dog Ralph was there, and all the other the other people that had come, and this person, Mr. Ginsberg, Allen Ginsberg, he was like a considered to be a poet. He was a poet, and he was like an avant-garde poet, and previously to the hippies, because it was just at a crossover time. So before the hippies had manifested or emerged, there were people called beatniks. And he'd been one of the leading beatniks, him and his crew of people. And I thought these beatniks were really fascinating people. They would sit around and talk about life. And growing up as a child, whenever I tried to talk about life and get answers to life, I would usually get scolded, just be quiet. Why are you talking about these things? And here were people who loved to talk about these things. Of course, little did I know they had no idea what they're talking about, but at least they were, attempting. So he was there. Some of his friends were there. We were waiting for that plane to land. And I started thinking, wow, maybe we didn't even really need to send him a ticket. He's a Swami, because we had no idea what a Swami really meant. In our little minds, we were thinking a Swami is somebody who can do like magical like things, like manifest, unmanifest, get bigger, get smaller, or fly. So just as I had that thought that maybe we didn't even need to send him a ticket, the plane he was on landed. And the people started deplaning, getting off the plane, and we're watching and watching. And we're wondering, are we going to recognize him? Which was kind of funny to think we wouldn't recognize him. But finally, suddenly, this like glaring light just kind of blinded the vision. Couldn't see through the glare. And then I suddenly found myself on the ground. And it wasn't making obeisances because we hadn't learned about that yet. So I'm on the ground and I'm kind of looking up, and I realized that light, that glaring light, was the actual glaring effulgence of this beautiful, not very large person. Because we were also thinking Swamis were probably pretty big. And he was literally gliding along. And you hear this a lot from the early day devotees, how he didn't walk clunk, clunk, clunk like us. He glided along. It was very graceful, very beautiful to watch him walk. So suddenly, right in front of my eyes, while I'm still down on the ground trying to figure out why I'm down there, I see these two plastic white pointy toes shoes gliding by, and I look up and I see this brightly effulgent, as I said, not so tall personality. And right behind him was Ralph, the dog. And I remember thinking, the dog's smarter than me. He's on his feet following, and I'm just here on the ground, befuddled. So I also got up, and all of us just started following him. Nobody thought to like guide the way or show the way. And apparently we didn't need to, because he knew exactly where to go. And he went out the entry, and we all followed him. And from there, everybody made their way back 2518 Frederick Street, the Radha Krishna Temple, second temple in ISKCON. And by the way, that was the first time Srila Prabhupada ever flew on a plane. So there was a little history into just that alone. The first airplane ride was Prabhupada coming to San Francisco. So in the storefront, it was packed. We say in America, jam-packed. Of course, in those days, the temples tended to be smaller. So it didn't take much to get them packed. But in this case, it was definitely packed and body to body. And I was looking, and there was all kinds of people, just like at the Conway Hall. I mentioned how there were all kinds of people from, the professor type to the workman type to the student type to the hippie type. Predominantly here was hippies, but all kinds of other people. But the hippies added a real interesting flavor to the whole show, because hippies, they like to dress up like different personalities, generally famous ones. So there was quite a few Jesus Christ. There were quite a few Geronimos, who was a very, very famous and mystical Apache Indian, and Cleopatras and what have you, the look for the day. And Prabhupada just sat, he took a glance. He sat on our little dais of Yasasai. He took a glance over everybody. And then he began a kirtan. And the kirtan resonated with the audience. And after the kirtan, spoke. Again, the audience was mainly quite a large number of hippie persons. And in addition to dressing kind of weird, or colorfully costumed, they would wear a lot of essential oils. Like essential oils are a big deal nowadays. Back then, they were mostly used to cover up the fact that probably they hadn't had a bath, and because as it was, not everybody had a bathroom in wherever they might be sleeping for the night. So the favorite oil was patchouli. So the air was kind of pungent with that aroma, and then incense. Somehow we had it in our minds that incense, there had to be a lot of incense. So there was a lot of incense, to the point there was like a cloud of incense. So, breathing was a little difficult if you had asthma or any other respiratory situation. So he spoke, and his first words were, there is no love in the material world. Now he's speaking to a large number of hippies, and just like our mantra, our theme, Hare Krishna, the hippies were peace and love, brother, peace and love, sister. So this was the symbol for peace and love. And now he's telling him there is no love in the material world. I remember feeling this great relief, because everybody was looking for love and nobody was finding it. And in fact, things are going downhill fast. The summer of love was becoming a very uncomfortable summer as things progressed. So he didn't just leave it like that. He didn't just drop a negative on us. He dropped the truth on us, but then he explained the source of, the nature of, and the person behind pure love, Lord Krishna, the origin of everything. So it was a beautiful moment, and everybody felt satisfied. And in explaining about Lord Krishna, the source of all love, the source of everything, we were feeling from him, from Srila Prabhupada, this immense outpouring of love, but a love like we had never experienced, not even with our parents, with our so-called boyfriend, girlfriends. It was something different. And we felt ourselves falling in love with him at the same time. So that was the first meeting. And after the kirtan, somebody brought in a tray with cut up pieces of fruit, some oranges, apples, and Prabhupada started giving each person a piece of fruit. And everybody came with their hands outstretched to get this little piece of fruit. I mean, nowadays you prasadam, you're thinking of a huge pile of, I don't know, khichdi or halva or so many things. Just this little piece of fruit, and everybody was so blissfully satisfied because that little piece of fruit was the first prasadam, and it was coming from the hands of Krishna's pure devotee. So it was a wonderful and extraordinary moment in San Francisco and for all of us.
So thank you so very much, Malati, for sharing so many wonderful stories with us, for sharing your radiant presence with us, and also for sharing your video. That was really sweet with Saraswati.
Well, that was, please give the, that's Vishaka.
Yeah, they did a
I just
lovely
happened
job.
to get one. She sent one to me. So Vishaka
Yeah.
Devi is an amazing personality.
Mhm.
And she's always thinking of ways to share Krishna through photography. And of course, her very eloquent, erudite speaking. I mean, she is bar none one of the top scholarly personalities in ISKCON.
And we will get to hear from her next Saturday when we
Yes.
have another Bond of Love interview.
Right.
So I encourage everyone to come for that as well. You'll see promotion for that going out very soon. So are there any other questions? Does anyone else have anything else you'd like to type in the chat box or ask? You can unmute yourself and ask if you'd like.
Somebody's.
Hare
Right.
Krishna, Malati.
So somebody's saying to me that I mentioned I'm not a writer, and I said that's painful. It'd be more painful if I wrote. But I would just like to say that I get a lot of people saying, "When are you going to write your book?" As far as I'm concerned, there's no need. The main thing is to promote Krishna consciousness, to promote Srila Prabhupada. And when you read the writings of the six Goswamis, they don't talk about themselves. They're talking about Krishna. They're talking about Lord Chaitanya. There's a lot of books now that are coming out by deeply realized devotees. By the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, there's some amazing devotees in ISKCON. For those people who think Prabhupada didn't give us everything, I'm sorry, think again. Read his books, pick up those books and study them. Pick up Chaitanya Charitamrita if you want deepness, but first get purified by hearing and chanting, So I feel like there's so many books out now, and I'm mentioned in quite a number of them. So anything I might have to say, it's already there. And let those who are realized, let those who can write, let those who are able to express in a meaningful way Krishna consciousness, let them write, and we'll all benefit. My little stories are wonderful, but beyond being maybe momentarily entertaining or, well, okay, I get that, a little understanding here or there. Not so much. So let those who can do that service. We all have things we can do, and I'll do the things I can do. And if those people who can write wonderfully, that goes together. It makes a package. Everybody doing what they can do for Prabhupada's movement and for Krishna.
Well, I just wanted to say that your entry in Bond of Love was wonderful. You were sharing your realization about wanting to please Srila Prabhupada and actually appreciating the criticism that you got from him.
Well, initially I didn't. I was so depressed. I can't do anything right. It was a pretty intense situation, granted, but how Prabhupada turned it around on me was so beautiful.
Maharani Jai Bhakti Goswamini. You can unmute yourself and ask a
Who
question.
is this person? Interesting name is why I'm asking.
Hare Krishna, Mother Malati Dasi. It's me here. I had had the pleasure to meet you in person, but of course, I don't aspire that you may remember this worthless person. You meet so many wonderful people.
Everybody has worth. There's no,
You're so
there's
sweet.
no such thing as a worthless person. Otherwise, what's Krishna doing in your heart?
Oh, you're so adorable. I have cried with happiness your entire presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you. I have a simple question for you, please, because you mentioned some great examples of moments when Srila Prabhupada was directly giving a clear stand of his opinion that we're spiritual souls and there is no difference between men and women when it comes to distributing the nectar of Mahaprabhu. And
he said actually in the matter of preaching Krishna consciousness. Yeah, but same thing, you know.
Beautiful. So then there is the beautiful line also in the movie, Hare Krishna, the mantra, when he says this also clearly, no? There is that question, you know exactly what I'm referring to, like even the women, and he's like, yes, of course, like there's no difference.
That was Rukmini. He was telling everybody he wanted us to go out and open more centers.
Yeah.
Rukmini says, even the girls?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I always quote that part when the question is like, even the girls, and he said, yes, of course, there is no difference between girls and boys. You all need to go outside. So my question is if you could please tell us some other instance when Srila Prabhupada also refers to this, so I can have a little more like quotes or moments to refer to directly to people when he was encouraging women in this way. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Well, not intending to be coy or anything, but that's why we wrote this book. This is why this book was put together, A Bond of Love. And this is the voices of Srila Prabhupada's daughters. And if you read this book, and it's a big read, so, you know, I don't expect anybody to just sit down and read it all in one shot, but, you know, there's almost 600 pages in this book of the voices of his daughters giving their experiences with Srila Prabhupada. And you will find no dissenting opinion in the voices of the ladies, that we felt uniquely cared for. And we never felt that he was speaking ill of us, like sometimes, sorry to say, men, they would do that, you know. In fact, at one point he cautioned them, and he said, you know, sometimes in the scripture, it'll say something about women, you know, maybe less intelligent or whatever. He says, don't take advantage of this and mistreat the women. And so these women are not ordinary women. They are devotees. I had a personal experience with that in Calcutta, where just so my key lock doesn't look proper. Anyway, so in the situation in Calcutta at the time, it's the same temple as it is now, but it was a little rough around the edges. And it wasn't intended as a place for people to live, yet we were living there. So Prabhupada lived there also on occasion. And the women had the upper floor. Now, to be more accurate, it was the rooftop. And to get to our upper floor rooftop, you had to walk through a common bathroom. That's right, the men and women had to share one bath. And there was a door at each end, which meant if you forgot to lock one of those doors, anybody could walk in on you doing whatever you happened to be doing. And we were so like westernized, we couldn't even get some of the basic things together, like the water in India at that time was not on 24 hours a day. It'd only be on certain times. And therefore we had big, huge, empty barrels that we had to fill up when the water was on. If you didn't fill up your barrel, you wouldn't have any water for the day. So being Westerners and being a little bit not so adept, there would be times when we forgot to fill the water barrel. So that added to some tension. And then, of course, somebody would forget to lock the door and you'd walk in, oh, sorry, and, a boy and a girl and a boy, sorry. So, it's awkward. And so then the boys got this really great idea how to solve the tension. And they decided to propose their great idea to Prabhupada one day on a morning walk. And their great idea is the girls should get out of the temple. We shouldn't be there. And if we weren't there, everything would be perfect. That was their consideration. So during Prabhupada's morning walk, myself and Palika, who at the time was married to Bhavananda, he was a grihasta at the time, and Kushalya, we would be there in the temple and we would quickly clean everything, get everything ready for when Prabhupada would return. If I was cooking at the time, that meant I'd be cooking. Otherwise, we were on the altar, we were cleaning, we were taking care of the deities. And as soon as we heard Prabhupada coming, which was easy because at that time the stairs were wooden and he had his cane. So we'd hear this coming up the stairs. So immediately we would run to the door at the top of the stairs, open the door, and we'd be standing there waiting for him. So that particular day when the boys decided to, we're going to tell Prabhupada, and he was certainly going to agree. They really thought he would agree. So they spent the whole walk telling him all the reasons why the women shouldn't be in the temple and how everything would be perfect after we were no longer in the temple. Prabhupada didn't say a word. So coming up the stairs, the door's open, we're standing there. He suddenly stops. He turns and he looks at all the boys behind him and he goes, but if you associate with these women, and he took his cane and he indicated the three of us standing there, you'll go back to Godhead. So the whole little mood among the boys suddenly took a shift. That was not the answer they expected, but it was quite clear. In the meantime, we were feeling sorry that there was so disturbance because of our presence. And we had noticed across the street, there's a little pond, a kund. And we noticed some ladies every morning and in the evening, they were taking their bath in that kund. So we decided we would also take our bath in the kund. And that way it would be less troublesome. The bathroom would not have so much traffic, at least in the morning. And we were doing that for a few days. And one of our well-wishers came to meet Prabhupada. And he goes, Prabhupada, your lady disciples are bathing across the street with the prostitutes. We had no idea that those ladies who were taking their baths were prostitutes. We just saw here some ladies taking a bath and we could do that too. But certainly it kind of sent the wrong message. So what we had attempted to do to be helpful was kind of embarrassingly not helpful. But we had Prabhupada had our backs and he would not allow any further suggestion of removing us from the safety of the temple.
So I see there's one more question from Sarah. She says, during the Maha Mantra song where you play the gong, is your daughter also heard singing? She says there seems to be a young child singing at one point.
No, she was too little. She was a baby at that point. No, there were no children there except for baby Saraswati. People are like, to this day, they come to me and they go, how was baby Saraswati? how is little Saraswati? And I'm like, she's like 52 years old, you know, and they kind of, oh, you know, somehow she's immortalized in this young body forever in the minds of some people. But yeah, the article now is very nice, the one in the back, the Godhead, and it does show, just like in the video, it showed an updated version of Saraswati. Likewise in the article also. Oh, I can tell you something else too. This isn't so much known, is that Saraswati is also initiated by Srila Prabhupada. And how did that happen? Well, at a certain point, when reading the Bhagavatam, I got an insight on the gravity of being a parent. And of course, we know that verse that, you know, don't become a parent if you cannot save your children from repeated birth and death. One of my god sisters, now departed, Lavangalatika, when she joined, she had a son who became one of Prabhupada's favorites. His name was Dwarkadish, and Prabhupada called him Mr. DDD, Dwarkadish Das. And he gave him at the age of 11, first and second initiation. Anyways, Prabhupada had a lot of hope for these young kids. And Labangalatik asked Prabhupada, well, what should my duty be now? You know, what is my duty? And he told her, your duty is to make sure your son never takes birth again in this material world. So we were, you know, getting aware of that responsibility. And I became acutely aware of it, realizing what a degraded person I was. You know, so I thought the only hope for this child is if she gets initiated by Prabhupada, because I can't save her, but he can. So it was in Mumbai, Juhu, Bombay, when we were still not established. We were there, but we didn't have our own buildings yet. So we were camping, and some of us were invited to stay in whatever spare place some of the tenants had. When I say some of us, I mean a few ladies. But basically, we're camping in a big tent. And so every evening when Prabhupada was present in Juhu, he would have a darshan on the roof of one of the apartment buildings. He had a flat that was given over for his use. And he would go up on the roof, and white cloth would be put down, bolsters where he could lean back comfortably would be placed behind him. And anybody could come, all the neighbors could come, the neighborhood children could come. Many beautiful photographs of the rooftop, the Jew rooftop pastimes. So at this point, I was solidly convinced that my daughter had to get initiated, otherwise there was no hope. So I waited for everybody to leave, and I was still sitting there in the corner, and Prabhupada noticed me, and he said, called me forward. He goes, is there anything? And I just, without any preamble, blurted out, can you initiate Saraswati? Just like that. Can you initiate Saraswati? He gave an interesting answer. He said, they are already initiated. Now, one would think that I would have had the wherewithal to say, oh, what do you mean? Just like when he said that he'd dreamt about her, I didn't say anything. It didn't even occur to me to say anything. So now he's saying, they've already been initiated. And instead of saying, can you explain that? Or what does that mean? I said, but can you initiate Saraswati? I was like really fixed on this. He just said, because he knew me by that time, he goes, bring beads. Well, I had beads with me in anticipation. So I pulled them out, I handed them to him, and he picked up the beads and he began to chant. And I sat there. When he finished chanting, he returned the beads and he said, and her name will be Miss Saraswati Devi. In other words, the name continued. And then he said, she can sit in for the next fire yajna. So she wasn't in India at this time. She was in the Dallas Gurukul. And shortly thereafter, the Gurukul had closed down and the children were all sent in various places. And for a while, my daughter was in Montreal, although I didn't communications between the school and the parents basically didn't exist. So I didn't even know the school had closed. I didn't know my daughter wasn't in Texas anymore. And the next thing I know is that I found out that she was in Europe. She was in Novel Mayapur. They had a Gurukul there that was beautifully run by Jyotirmayi Devi Dasi, headmistress, and she had been sent there. I was more or less based there, but I had a traveling Sankirtan party. At that time, it was the only traveling party of ladies where there was not a male involved. So we'd based ourselves up in Denmark, and every once in a while we'd come down to the farm. And so we would call in once in a while to catch up the news. And somebody told me, your daughter's here. And I thought at first they were joking with me, but no, she was there. So we came back down and we, met with her. Actually, at the time, my base at that point, I hadn't shifted to France yet. My base was in Amsterdam. So there was going to be a deity installation. The deities in Radha Gopinath and Lalita and Vishaka, those deities were first installed in Amsterdam. And quick fun history of those deities was my traveling party and I were discussing one day, like, it would be really nice to have Radha and Krishna in our temple in Amsterdam. And already Jagannath, Subhadra, Baladev, which were installed by Srila Prabhupada, were there. But we were starting to hanker for Radha and Krishna. So when we came back that week to the temple, presented to this temple president that if you let us go out and collect next week, just let us collect, I'll go to India and I'll get Radha Krishna deities. And somehow he was bewildered enough to agree to this plan. The plan was missing a pretty essential ingredient, which was, first of all, we should have requested to our GBC. And second of all, we should have requested for permission and blessings from Srila Prabhupada, none of which happened. But I was allowed to collect. I went to India and I found beautiful, beautiful Radha Krishna. And if you go to Radhadesh now, those are the deities. In addition to Radha and Krishna, I saw these beautiful little gopis. And my mind goes, oh, Lalita and Vishaka. So I got those too. And on the way back, I took a train, I had flown from India. I come back. And when I get back, I said, we're going to have a nice altar now because now Radha and Krishna are going to be here. They need a beautiful altar. So I designed an altar and I took a train to Carrara, which is the marble place in Italy. And one of the devotees from the Roman temple came and met with me, and we went to the different quarries and we met a really nice person. I explained the plan, showed him my sketches, and he agreed he could build out, could make that altar in pieces so that we could easily reconstruct it. It had to be shipped. So having a full-blown altar wasn't practical, but into pieces that were marked and, descriptions how to put it back together. And on my way back from Italy to Holland, I saw the train was stopping in Paris. So I got off the train and I went to the temple because I had never been in Paris and I hadn't seen their beautiful deities, Radha Parasishwara. And it turned out Bhagavan was there. Now, Bhagavan was GBC, and he was also the GBC for Holland. And he was really surprised to see me. And he goes, oh, what are you doing here? What brings you here? And that's when I first kind of thought, like, oh, maybe we should have mentioned this to him. But I told him, what had happened. And he didn't get upset at all. He was like rather pleased because there was this tension, these little competitions between Bhagavan's zone and Hamsaduta's zone. So Bhagavan said, oh, good, now we'll have more deities than Hamsaduta, which wasn't really the best, consciousness. But anyway, at least, it was okay. We had these deities now. And it was arranged for a very very excellent deity worship personality. His name was Jayatirtha, and he would come from America and he would install the deities. So it was at that installation of Radha Gopinath and Lalita Vishaka that my daughter sat in on the fire yagya to cement her initiation. And she was 7.5 years old. So when Jayatirtha said, so what are the 4 regulative principles? She's, no meat eating, no gambling, no intoxications, no illicit sex. And when she said no illicit sex, everybody kind of like tittered, like, a broken little laugh, because they're looking at this 7-year-old girl, like, I don't even think she knew what sex was, what to speak of illicit sex, but, she knew you didn't do it. So that was her initiation, completed now by sitting in on the
So thank you so much. It looks like we're at 5 o'clock here on the East Coast. And
I'm on the East Coast as well.
yes.
5 o'clock. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. This has been amazing to have darshan of you and to have this Sanga with you and be in your association, especially after you've had such a long day of being online. So we really appreciate it.
Started early, and it was with the I don't know if you know Parijata Devi Dasi from Mumbai. She's based in Juhu, but she's actually the communication person in India. And so she and a disciple of Radhana Swami. And she realized, okay, it's Maharaj's appearance, but men, because of the COVID thing and all, there was no like big Vyasa Puja offering anywhere. He didn't want that. But still, the devotees, his disciples, they wanted to, in some way, recognize and honor his Vyasa Puja. And that meant basically the men. So Parijata suddenly had the idea, but wait a minute, it's just like when I was thinking, everything is coming from the side of the men, the voices of the ladies. Here's the voices of the ladies need to be heard. So she suddenly got it together. She knows how to communicate. She's the communication ministress. So she got it together to have for the ladies. There were 2 days. The first day was several hours, and the devotees, ladies, were so happy. But not everybody had known about it, and more who heard about it wanted to also take part. So she had a second edition, and that was this morning. And it went on for 4 hours. And I wasn't thinking that I would, be there the whole time. But once I started hearing the beautiful voices of the beautiful ladies, I couldn't leave. Didn't even want to leave my computer to eat something. And I was really hungry. I didn't do it. It was so wonderful. The voices of the ladies are very powerful, not by volume, but by sweetness and knowledge, by understanding, by compassion. That's the power in the voices of the ladies.
So thank you again, and thank you, Vaishnavis, for joining us today in the Sangha. We will have another Sangha on January 9th, so we hope to see you back then. And again, yes, in Vishaka next Saturday for the Bond of Love interview. So thank you again so very much. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Ki Jai. Jai. Malati Devi Dasi Ki Jai.
Thank you, all of you. I think I saw Jagarini's name. Jagarini's there, so she's hiding behind the black screen, and Duttre's there also. And I also saw Shraddhanjali and her famous cat.
Leela.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.